You are looking at new video of the vascular surgeon turned accused killer calmly walking through the county jail in Ohio, where he is going to live for the foreseeable future.
First case before the court, State of Ohio versus Michael McKee.
On the surface, Michael McKee seemed like a calm, highly skilled medical professional, but now new details are coming to light that he allegedly is a cold, calculated killer who reportedly stalked his ex-wife and her husband in the weeks leading up to their murders. What could come next in this case? And I'll tell you why the death penalty may not be a factor, even though it's legal in Ohio. We're on The Case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, real quick before we start this episode of On the Case, we do hope that we can keep you on top of the latest news when it comes to true crime. But when it comes to staying on top of the news stories across the world, it can be really hard with concerns about media bias these days. I mean, who knows what to believe? And I want to introduce you to our sponsor today, Straight Arrow News. Straight Arrow News is a personalized news platform that gives readers fact-based journalism to inform and build trust. They have this media mist tool that shows you headlines not seen on mainstream outlets. It provides useful commentary that cuts through sensational spin. Their site and app also points out biases with a media landscape to group sources by political leaning for full transparency. So if you're ready for a better way to get the news, go to san.com/OTC or just click the link in my description. Straight Arrow News. Skip the drama, get the facts. Welcome back to Trustworthy Journalism. Michael McKee was a respected surgeon. It seemed, at least, a smart person who grew up doing everything right. But now he's accused of being a killer. On the surface, we're talking about someone who is a respected medical professional, but the accusations he's facing could mean he will never live as a free person again. And yet, each time we see him, he is calm, frankly emotionless. And we see that again in this new video of McKee going into the Franklin County Jail in Ohio. That is where he has been ever since he returned to Ohio to face charges for the murders of Spencer and Monique Tepe on December 30th. Now, McKee was arrested at a Chick-fil-A in Rockford, Illinois, near where he worked, which was St. Anthony Hospital. It's about an hour and a half west of Chicago, and it's roughly 7 hours from Columbus. And police are alleging that he drove from Rockford to the Ohio Capitol to kill Monique Tepe and her husband, Spencer Tepe. Now, I'm going to dive more into this new video and what we can take away from it in just a moment. And we'll also talk about whether McKee could be facing more charges in just a minute. Right now, he is not facing the possibility of the death penalty, it seems, and he's also not facing charges related to the Tepe's children, ages 4 and 1, who were inside the house when he allegedly killed Monique and Spencer. Now, this video of Dr. Michael McKee is from his court appearance just last week in Ohio court. A grand jury in Ohio indicted McKee on 5 counts. So as we're recording this, he's facing 4 for aggravated murder and 1 for aggravated burglary. Through his attorney, McKee pleaded not guilty to all of the charges. He did not say a word in court. He appeared through video feed from the county jail. Now, this is the document that shows that he has entered those not guilty pleas. Now, McKee is accused of killing Spencer and Monique Tepe in the early hours of the morning on December 30th, the day before New Year's Eve. Spencer was a respected dentist, and this story started with Spencer not showing up for work on December 30th. It made coworkers incredibly concerned because they say that Spencer was the type of guy who loved his job and he was incredibly reliable. And even more concerning for those friends and coworkers was when Spencer didn't show up, they called Monique Tepe and she didn't answer the phone. Monique was a stay-at-home mom to the Tepe's kids. Now, this is their wedding video, and the Tepes had built an incredible life together, it seems. They had been married since 2020. The Tepes were found shot dead, though, on December 30th. They were found in the second-floor bedroom of their home in Columbus. Police say there was no sign that someone forced their way into the Tepe's home, and that's still a glaring question at this point. As we dove into the Tepe's past as this case was developing, it became very apparent that this was a couple who loved being around people. In fact, they were described as the life of the party. They loved bringing people together at their home.
Columbus Police, Tech 107.
Yes, I would like to ask for a wellness check on an individual at their home.
And you just think of the amount of people who called 911 when Spencer didn't show up for work, or even went to the house to look for Spencer and Monique on that morning as an example of how loved they were.
There's a body.
There's a body inside?
Yeah. Okay, hold on 1 second. Let me get you on the line with the medic, okay? Stay on the line.
But as we looked into who the Tepes were, there was one part of the story of their past that did raise a bit of a red flag. Monique had been married before. Spencer was her second husband. She was married roughly a decade before, in her late 20s, to a man named Michael McKee. He was an aspiring doctor who also went to Ohio State. The two of them were married in 2015. Now, we've talked about this marriage a lot if you've been following this story with us, but now we're getting more of what police say this marriage allegedly was really like. Because on the surface, the marriage, it was short and it came to an end, but there wasn't anything in looking at their case that would have told you that this was a messy divorce, or at least not as messy as some divorces can be. In a lot of cases, when you look at divorces, the proceedings can be drawn out over years, and there are allegations that are just incredibly damning. But in this case, when we looked at online records, we saw the proceedings were relatively quick. Monique filed for divorce in 2017 in Ohio. She had been living with Michael McKee in Virginia, where he was doing his residency for his surgical training after they were married. But at the time she filed for divorce, she had been separated from McKee for at least 6 months, and she was living with family outside of Columbus, and McKee was still in Virginia. A month and a half after she filed for divorce, that divorce was finalized. That was it. Now, on the surface, it may have looked amicable, but now we're learning that allegedly wasn't true, that this marriage was disturbing. And even though on paper it said it was over, McKee allegedly was not ready to let this go. It appears publicly McKee, he also told people that this marriage was somewhat amicable, but shocking. He even made it seem like he was the victim, according to a now deleted TikTok from a woman who claimed she dated McKee after he got divorced in 2017. And she said the relationship went on for most of 2018. So this would have happened right after that divorce was finalized. Now, this woman posted pictures in this deleted TikTok of her with McKee when he even went to go meet her family. She said, as far as the divorce was concerned, McKee told her that he was the victim. He came home from work one day and Monique Tepe was gone. Their dog was gone. Her stuff was gone. That was it. But this woman also said in this TikTok that in her relationship with McKee, he seemed nice. He treated her well. The relationship came to an end, though, because she just wasn't really feeling it. She felt like he had a wall up. She also said he wouldn't dive any more into that marriage other than it coming to that shocking claim. We did reach out to this woman to ask her a little bit more about her relationship, but she never got back to us for comment. But now we're going to talk about what police say this marriage was like. This week, we received a newly unsealed affidavit that has the information police have gathered during their investigation about Monique's marriage to Michael McKee. The document states that homicide detectives were told early on in the investigation by people who knew the Tepes that McKee was definitely someone that they needed to look at for these murders. Friends of Monique Tepe told detectives that Michael McKee had been abusive, that he had made numerous threats on her life during and even after their marriage. Listen to this, quote, an identifiable witness told detectives that Monique Tepe had shared an allegation against Michael McKee of forced, unwanted sex and of strangulation. Now, it goes on to say, quote, another identifiable witness told detectives that Michael D. McKee had told Monique that he could kill her at any time and would find her and buy the house right next to her, and that she will always be his wife. Now, we don't know even to this point about what the communication was like between Monique and McKee after their marriage. According to this and friends who knew Monique, that there was at least some level of communication after that divorce went final. Now, according to the affidavit, an alleged threat that McKee would find Monique, that was reportedly more than just words. Now, you'll remember the Tepes were murdered on December 30th, the day before New Year's Eve, and it's still unclear why allegedly McKee decided that that was the day he was going to do this. But there's a new development in this case, and police say it involves where McKee was on December 6th. Now, remember, McKee lives in Illinois. He has an address for a luxury condo building in the nice section of Chicago, Lincoln Park. And then he works in Rockford, Illinois, which is about an hour and a half west. The Tepes, they live in Columbus, Ohio. They were graduates of Ohio State, and they were big fans of the Buckeyes, as many Ohio State grads are. On December 6th, the Tepes were in Indianapolis because their college's football team was playing Indiana in the Big Ten championship game. Police say Spencer and Monique made the trip out to Indy to watch their team at the game with friends. But back at the house in Columbus, as they were in Indianapolis, police are now saying Michael McKee was there. They say McKee was at their house. Police say they have video of McKee entering the, quote, curtilage of the Tepe's home. So curtilage, which is now a word a lot of people are getting accustomed to since police released it, that is like the direct area surrounding the Tepe's house. They do not say that McKee went into the Tepe's home, but they say he allegedly was there. And they say that they also see him exit the property a few hours later. Now, the document goes on to say, as far as where Monique and Spencer were, that Monique left the football game in the second half to go back to the hotel where they were staying. And friends told police that Spencer had told them that Monique left the game because she was upset about something involving her ex-husband. Now, police, according to the affidavit, they do not expand any more on that part of the story. They don't say whether McKee reached out to Monique or whether Monique knew that McKee was at the home. Now, when the Columbus police chief took questions from the media after McKee's arrest, she said that there were no previous calls from the Tepe home involving Michael McKee.
The family mentioned that Monique previously said that he had been abusive towards her in the past. Was there any evidence or indication of that prior to this incident?
What I can tell you is that we did not have any reports, or we did not have any information related to any type of incidents regarding the ex-husband and Monique.
We also have some new information about how police were able to track down Michael McKee. Now, you remember the person of interest video that they put out prior to his arrest in the days after the Tepes were killed. That video showed a man dressed in dark clothing walking down the alleyway behind the Tepes' home. There are detached garages. They lived in these townhouses, and there was a home that had a Nest camera, which angled at the alleyway, and you see this person walking down the alley, and they are not looking at the camera. Now, it's unclear whether they knew the camera was there, but we weren't able to see that person's face. And police are now saying they do believe that this is Michael McKee on the night around the time that Spencer and Monique were killed. Police also say they tracked McKee, a silver SUV that arrived in the area of the Tepes' home before they were killed, and they say it left shortly after. Now, police say the vehicle has distinctive features to it that detectives are able to identify it as McKee's vehicle. Now, on top of that, and this was a very interesting development in this affidavit that was released, detectives say that McKee allegedly had stolen licenses from Ohio and Arizona on this vehicle, and they were displayed at different times. They go on to say that they found the vehicle to be associated with his work address in Illinois, as well as a past address of where he lived. Now, as far as where McKee went after Virginia, we know that he did a fellowship of some kind in Maryland. He also had active licenses as a surgeon in Illinois and California. And at one point, he had an active surgical license for the state of Nevada because he lived in Las Vegas, where he worked for a period of time for a surgical group. And we know this because he's named in this malpractice lawsuit that we've talked about, where he is accused of not properly training an employee that put a catheter into a patient, and then allegedly that catheter, or at least part of it, was left inside of that patient. Now, for as bad of a look as that may be, no surgeon wants to be named in a malpractice lawsuit. The part that really, I think, pertains to this investigation and who Michael McKee is the part of the lawsuit when the company that was tasked with serving McKee papers couldn't find him. They tried 9 times and they couldn't find him. And the surgical group that he worked for, beyond that, when they were contacted by the company trying to serve him papers, they said they had no idea where McKee was. And this was roughly 3 months before the Tepes murders. The attorney who filed that lawsuit told WSYX TV in Columbus that not only could they not find McKee, the address that he allegedly gave his place of employment wasn't his. It was a fake address. Now, most recently, McKee worked for this hospital out of Rockford, Illinois, and that hospital has allegedly been cooperating with investigators. It's unclear if they knew of the malpractice lawsuit that he was named in and what type of research they did about his past leading up to hiring him at this hospital in Rockford, Illinois. But police say on the night of that Big Ten championship game, December 6th, McKee wasn't on the schedule to be working. Police also say on January 9th, that's the day that McKee was arrested, they seized his silver SUV from the parking lot of the hospital in Rockford, and they say that McKee's car had a temporary Arizona tag prior to the murders. But when they find his car in the parking lot at St. Anthony Hospital in Rockford, Illinois, get this, quote, detectives noticed fresh scrape marks on the window where the sticker had been on the vehicle prior to the homicides, and they say it had been hastily removed. Police also say that during the day that the Tepes were killed, McKee's phone was left at his work and it showed no activity for 17 hours. Now, after his arrest, McKee's apartment in Chicago was searched, and that's where police claim they found multiple weapons, including one that they say has a preliminary link to the crime scene. So for as much as we are learning in this affidavit that came out, it is still unclear how McKee allegedly entered the Tepes' home. Remember, police said there was no sign of forced entry. And once again, here's this video of McKee after he waived his extradition from Illinois when he arrived at the Franklin County Jail in Ohio. And we see McKee in this video. He walks calmly in. His hands are cuffed in the jail. He has a jacket on. Seems like he has some civilian clothing on. He changes into the jail slides, and he really just shows no emotion. And he's following orders from members of law enforcement. He's being cooperative as he's been brought in to face incredibly serious charges in the state of Ohio. Now, remember, the Tepes children were in the home, as well as their dog, when they were allegedly killed. These kids just 4 and 1 years old. And when you listen back to those 911 calls, you can hear from a friend who's at the home, the children crying inside. Those kids are safely with family, which is good news. But when you look at the charges McKee is facing, these 4 counts of aggravated murder with the specification of him allegedly using some kind of silencer and an aggravated burglary charge, he isn't facing charges specifically related to the children, something like child endangerment. We'll talk a little bit more about why that might be in just a moment. It's also important to note that Ohio, it is a death penalty state, but at this point, the charges do not appear to show that specification. The lead prosecutor for Franklin County, Ohio, where this case is taking place, Shayla Favor, is someone who does not support the death penalty, so it's unclear if that is the reason as to why McKee is not facing any sort of specification for the death penalty. And we'll talk a little bit more about that with Bradford Cohen, criminal defense attorney, here in just a moment. Now, as far as the most recent court appearance for Michael McKee, this is what happened.
First case before the court, State of Ohio versus Michael McKee.
Now, in McKee's most recent court appearance, which happened in Ohio, he entered not guilty pleas on the 5 counts that he is facing. His attorney didn't ask for bond. She didn't raise the issue, but she did say they may raise that at a point in the future. And they also waived the reading of the indictment in court, and we'll wait and see what happens next. Join us now to talk more about this case is criminal defense attorney Bradford Cohen. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. At this point, and there's still a lot of information that hasn't been released by police as of yet, but how strong of a case does it seem like the prosecution has just based off what we know?
Just based off what we know. So what I've read and what we know is that they possibly have the murder weapon. They possibly have the silencer that was allegedly used. They definitely have his cell phone data, cell phone records, GPS data, pictures of the alleged vehicle that he was driving, and identifying it as his vehicle. I think it's a fairly strong case where it comes into right now, right, where it comes into play for a trial. What we normally do as defense attorneys is we look at all the evidence, right? We see what they have, and then we see how that evidence was obtained. So if you look at Luigi Mangione's case, you say, wow, that's a really strong case. They have the gun. They have a notebook that says, you know, I want to kill this guy. They have him going and showing up at the scene and wearing the same clothing. So you feel like that's a very strong case, but then you see motions from the defense to exclude that evidence in a motion to suppress where the gun might be thrown out, the notebook might be thrown out. That changes the dynamics of a trial very quickly for the prosecution. Also, you see sometimes prosecutors get more evidence as time goes by, and that will also change the dynamics of a trial. A new witness, a new expert, something that maybe wasn't tested that becomes tested. So very early on, some cases seem very strong or very weak. You won't know until kind of the next shoe falls.
And I'm sure there will be more information that'll come out, but to this point, it seems like a lot of the information that's been released like puts him at the scene, right? The video of the person of interest, they say it's him. They have this vehicle that they say is his, and there was even some stolen plates from Ohio and Arizona that they're tying him to. And then you have December 6th, where he's on this, you know, he's at the property. How important will it be though, like for the prosecution to have the evidence? And I know we have the gun potentially, they said there was a preliminary link, but how important is it when you are prosecuting a case, trying to put someone away for murder, that you have what actually shows him in the house and allegedly firing the shots that killed Monique and Spencer Tepe, beyond just the fact that here's an ex-husband and he's in the area?
It's going to be very important. Obviously, they have to put him inside the house in order to kind of take that next step. That being said, there are always little gaps in cases, and those are the gaps that the defense usually really hammers, but that the prosecution will say, use your common sense. The guy here's his phone within 25 yards. Here's the gun that was used. Here's his fingerprints on the doorknob. Like, do we really have to show you that he is in the house? There's no cameras that are going to show you that he's in the house committing the murder. But here's all the steps we take to show you that it's common sense that he was in the house. It's common sense that he did these murders, that he was there, a couple days before. Now, the defense will say those fingerprints could have come from a couple days before. That gun that was used could have been someone else's gun that he got a hold of. I mean, there's a host of defenses there that you will try to use. The first one always is there a self-defense issue there? I don't think so. It's 4:00 in the morning, unless he showed up, knocked on the door, they got into an altercation, and then all of a sudden shots were fired. But then you have to address why there was a silencer on the gun. Why were these plates stolen? So for I treat trials kind of like a boxing. I used to box, right? So for every punch, there's going to be a counter punch, a counter move. And that's what makes really good trial attorneys, is to anticipate that, to see around the corner and know what's coming next, so that you can say, hey, this is why this happened. This case is going to be very difficult for a defense attorney just because of what I know right now. Again, I don't know how the evidence was obtained. And as that evidence you start sifting through it, it could become a better case or it could become a worse case.
And we don't know what the conversations his defense attorney, Diane Menashe, is having with him right now. But for us on the outside, there's all this new information that comes out. Like, it's not just about December 30th. He was also allegedly at their house on December 6th while the couple was away. And that seems incredibly damning from the public perception standpoint. If you were defending Michael McKee, like, how much information do you probably have at this point about what happened and what his relationship was to his ex-wife and her husband?
So obviously, I've handled a lot of murder cases. You sit down with your client, you go through the facts, you go through the issues, the different kind of roadblocks that are in your way to a not guilty. And you say, like, hey, here's what they're saying. Where are we going with this? You got to give me some direction and tell me where we're going with this. It seems like you were there on December 6th, so they have evidence that you were there on December 6th. Your client might say, I wasn't there. And then you're just dealing with what the testimony is and what he's going to tell you. And whether or not that's true or false, that's what you have to work with, right? So he'll say, no, that wasn't me, or I wasn't there. I've had video of people where you can clearly see it's my guy. And he's like, that's not me. I remember when I was a very young attorney, one of the very first, and I used to go to trials on a weekly basis. That's how I became a trial attorney. Is I would watch trials. I'd leave law school. I'd skip classes to watch the greats in trial and watch their cross-examinations, watch how they deal with things. And one of the very first trials that I watched was a murder case where an individual was beat up, and then he came back to a barber shop where he was beat up, and he draws a shotgun like the next day and says, oh, who wants to beat me up now? And then everyone in the barbershop draws their guns. He makes a run for it. He turns and he fires the shotgun just randomly, hits a guy and kills him. So the defense wanted to say, hey, listen, he just ran away. He was done with this whole thing and he was leaving. And this was a random shot. But the defendant wanted to say, that wasn't me. Like, it just wasn't me. I was at a different barbershop. So you have to deal with what your client is telling you. And that in this case, he may be saying it wasn't me, and that's not me, and that's not my car. So you have to deal with those things.
One piece of evidence I find really interesting, because we see the location data on cell phones a lot in cases. And if you have a suspect or a defendant who has their cell phone on them, and it can place them right at the scene when something happens. In this case, as far as the night that Monique and Spencer were killed, they say his phone didn't show any activity or movement for 17 hours, which again, from the public standpoint, you can say, well, he left his phone behind, so then he wouldn't be tracked to the location of the house. So from the prosecution, they could say that shows the intent that he wanted to do this, but it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, because the cell phone doesn't show him there. Like, how strong of a piece of evidence is that?
So generally, cell phone data is the strongest pieces of evidence that the state would have. In this case, what you would look at for the prosecution is his history of cell phone use. If there's never a time where his cell phone hasn't been used for a period of 15, 16, 17 hours in the past 2 years, it is highly unusual that for 17 hours, the phone just wouldn't be at use, right? Maybe it's in there's a company that makes these bags, Faraday bags. It could have been in one of those Faraday bags. He still had it with him, but there's no transmission coming in or going out from the phone. That's what the prosecution will say. Obviously, the defense would say, hey, listen, his phone died. He didn't use it. He left it there. He went to sleep, or he went to the gym, or whatever he did. And that's why it was off for 17 hours. It happens. It is, yes, you're right. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. The issue is the length of time. So if the phone wasn't being used for 3, 4, 5 hours, that would be a lot better than it wasn't used for 17 hours during this period of time. So the fact that they're not going to have phone data definitely hurts the prosecution, but they'll also have car GPS data, black box issues. Like, there's so much these days that you can get from Ring cameras and neighborhood cameras and red light cameras. It is really the worst time to commit a crime is now, because of all of these ways that they can track you and trace you and see where you're going. And this isn't, the 90s. And a lot of crimes got done in the 90s because there were no cell phones, there were no Ring cameras, there were no GPS data in your car. But that's what they're going to do. They're going to rely on those type of things to show that, the GPS data in the car puts him here, or the car itself is here, right? Why? So his phone was off. Obviously, it shows why his phone was off. He never loans his car out to anybody. So all those type of things are going to come into play. And like I said, a case that looks very strong now may fall apart, or a case that looks weak in areas may get very strong because they start finding more evidence and looking for different ways to find that evidence.
And then you look at the charges he's facing. There's a specification on there where they accuse him of using a silencer. There's not a specification that this is a death penalty case. And Ohio's a state where the death penalty is legal. I know the Franklin County prosecutor, Shayla Favor, when she ran for office, she is against the death penalty. How often does and I know the death penalty can be a political issue, and, to be a DA or a lead prosecutor, that's a political position. How often does the opinion on the death penalty by the person who heads the office actually impact whether that is charged to someone in a case like this?
So it does affect it. And state attorneys can look at different cases and say, hey, we're not going to be prosecuting those anymore. Look at marijuana cases, for example. A lot of state attorneys went into office saying, I'm just not going to prosecute marijuana cases anymore. And they just stopped prosecuting marijuana cases. And they're an elected official. If people don't like that, they vote them out of office. So often you'll see state attorneys that'll take stances on certain crimes and say they don't want to prosecute those crimes, or they don't want to handle it that way, and it can affect the case. In this case, that could be the reason why the death penalty is not on the table, is because she doesn't believe in it. But when Janet Reno was the state attorney in Miami, she also didn't believe in the death penalty, but she also said, hey, listen, I don't personally believe in it ethically or morally, but I'm going to do my job. And if it's applicable in a case, I'm going to file it. So, you have that kind of difference in opinion on state attorneys. Today's state attorneys' opinions matter and their ethics and morals and things of that nature and what they want to file matter more than maybe in the 90s and 2000s, when people were just like, hey, listen, my job is to file on crimes. I don't believe in possession of marijuana, but as long as it's illegal, I'm going to file on it.
And then the other part of it is, and it's really the, there's so many sad parts to this story, obviously, but the idea that they had kids 4 and 1 years old who were in the house when this happened. Physically, they're unharmed. But you listen to the 911 call and you can tell the people who are calling from outside the home, you can hear the kids inside, and it's incredibly tragic. Why would Michael McKee at this point, at least, not face charges for allegedly doing this with kids in the home?
So it just depends, right? If the kids were sleeping, and there's a couple different ways that he could be charged with it. So if the kids were sleeping, the murders happen, and A, he doesn't know the kids are there, or B, the kids don't wake up, or the kids are not running around the house during the murder, or the kids don't get hit with something. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is if he could have anticipated the kids being in the home, and then he commits these murders and then says nothing, does nothing, 911's not called, these kids are in the house by themselves, little kids. They could, go hungry, or they could, pick something up that could hurt them. Then you start looking at it closer to whether or not it's child endangerment, that he essentially left them alone in the home with no supervision whatsoever. That kind of would be a stretch, but it would be something to throw on the pile. Like, listen, I've seen state attorneys file 30 different charges on a case when they know they can prove maybe 5. That's just what state attorneys do. They overcharge in many cases, and a lot of times that comes back to bite them in the ass. In this case, if they filed that, they may feel it takes away from the murder case. So let's just focus on the murder case. You saw that in the Casey Anthony case. I think, filing it as a first-degree murder was a mistake, and the way they tried that was a mistake. Not to take away from Jose Baez's defense, because I thought it was a genius closing and a genius way to defend the case, which it was like no holds barred. But you could also attribute the loss to the state, where they were just clueless as to what the perception of the jury was. When you're trying to prove a first-degree murder case, you need more than just a dead body. You need to prove the first-degree murder case. And that's a real mistake sometimes that prosecutors make in overcharging or adding charges that take away from the main focus. So it could be that that's why they haven't charged him with that.
Well, and like kind of to your point too, of what seems like a strong case may not be at the end, like just Casey Anthony might be one of them, where everybody thought, this is going to be a guilty verdict, no doubt. And then Jose Baez gives like one of the great defenses of all time.
And for the record, I was saying all along on Casey Anthony that they're not going to find her guilty of first-degree murder. It wasn't a first-degree murder case. And then when they said, we're not going to file any lesser charges, I kept saying, this is a not guilty. And in fact, the great Nancy Grace told me I was crazy, that I shouldn't have been making that argument. And when it came back not guilty, I rubbed it in her face as much as I could.
I was going to say that's probably the first phone call you make, and all the way back in the day on that.
It was, and then she never had me on the show again.
I bet. In this case, because if this isn't a death penalty case, I feel like in some defenses where it seems like the cards are stacked against someone, for a criminal defense attorney, like the win is keeping your client alive. If this isn't a death penalty case and it ends up being as strong a case for the state as it appears at this point, as more info comes out, like, yes, a not guilty verdict would be a massive win, huge upset. Like, what's the goal if you're a criminal defense attorney heading into a case, if it ends up being incredibly strong and it's the death penalty is not on the table?
Well, I mean, anything less than a first degree, right? So it's like, if the death penalty is not on the table and the offer is life, then it's actually a lot less pressure on the defense attorney, because the offer's life. You have no choice but to go to trial. So why not go to trial? The best case scenario is, the worst case scenario is you get life, right? And the offer's life. The better case scenario is you get a second degree or a manslaughter, where you say there was some, it wasn't premeditated. It was something that he went over there, but then something broke out and it just happened. I had a murder case in San Francisco that they charged as a first degree, and it came back as a second degree. That's a win, because, they were insisting it was a first degree. It was a very high profile individual who was killed. We didn't get a fair trial. I don't think we got a fair trial in San Francisco, but that's a whole nother story. But long story short is we still got a second degree, even after all those things happened and evidence was being let in that shouldn't have been let in. that's a win, because instead of life, now you have the chance for parole after 15. So those are all wins when you look at first-degree murder cases, that the offer is life. Now, if the offer was a manslaughter or the offer was a second degree, now there's a little bit more pressure on the defense attorney.
And we'll see how this case plays out. Very much still in the beginning. Bradford Cohen, criminal defense attorney. Always great to have you on Law and Crime.
Thanks, Ben.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and now you can watch episodes of On the Case on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.